it's a genuine pleasure and honor to be able to give a presentation from time to time in this Discourse series. It's a wonderful series, and what I can offer is generally off to the side a little bit of the mainstream, and I hope that it will prove to be complementary and lead to some active conversation. So, as you've seen in the announcement, my theme this morning is our brain and our internal state. And this word state can mean a range of things. We can say that we're in a joyous state or in a very sad state. We can be very calm and peaceful, or we can find ourselves in an agitated state. Sometimes meditation will put us in a state that is hard to reach in any other way and may even be difficult to describe. The states that I will focus on this morning, however, are the three to which Dr. Sane introduced us at the very beginning of his series of discourses on the Ganapati Upanishad. They are states that all of us experience on a regular basis, over which we have little or no control, but that are central to the lives that we lead. And these are the waking state, Jagriti, the dream state, Swapna, and the deep sleep state, or Sushupti. And as you know, Vedanta recognizes a fourth state, the Turiya state, but I find that concept complex and somewhat elusive, and I will not touch on that today. So our theme this morning can be rephrased as our brain and our waking, dreaming, and sleep states. And I will proceed in a sequence that is somewhat different from that offered in Indian philosophy. That philosophy usually describes the three states in the sequence: waking state, dream state, and then deep sleep state. Neuroscience, in contrast, uses the sequence waking state, sleep state, subdivided into three stages, and then only the dream state. And inasmuch as we'll be looking at scientific evidence, I will follow the sequence that is conventional in neuroscience. So let's begin with the waking state. This is the state in which we are maximally aware of our place in the material world. As we discussed back in December, our sensory systems about that world, and our brains synthesize it into an experiential image. This waking state is full, isn't it? We enjoy our families, we care for our children, we work, we exercise, we study, we meditate, we eat and drink, and so on and so forth. From a biological perspective, we are highly successful organisms, and we do everything that is necessary for us to survive, to reproduce, and to care for our offspring until they mature and can reproduce. Sleep turns out to be an equally important state. It's not just sort of giving up awakeness. One reflection of its importance is that it occurs in just about every animal species that has ever been studied. It's not at all peculiar to us humans. The specifics vary. By no means every animal sleeps for 6 to 8 hours at a stretch, and you can see that this would be very dangerous in the presence of predators. Right? You just would be unaware of the tiger who's coming after you. In fact, a number of birds sleep with 1/2 of the brain at a time. And in this way, they never interrupt their ability to watch for potential predators. Here's an extreme example of a sleep pattern that is different from the human. We humans sleep for the typical 6 to 8 hours at a stretch. There's a species of penguins called chinstrap penguins that live in the Antarctic, and they have an average sleep duration of 4 seconds, not hours, seconds. They switch between sleep and wakefulness literally thousands of times in a single day. Sometimes they sleep with both hemispheres, sometimes just with one hemisphere, but they do sleep. And apparently, they actually sleep even more than we do because their estimated total time of sleep every day is not our 8 hours, but 11 hours. So lots of variations, and sleep is ever present. The third state, the dream state, is a kind of sleep that is dominated by stories, usually visual stories, that we ourselves generate. It's related to the awake state in several ways, one of which is simply that the movies we show ourselves when we dream take place largely in the world of our waking experience. There are people, there are plants and pets and houses and songs, all kinds of things that we are familiar with from our daily waking experience. And of course, there may also be components that are beyond the everyday. We may find ourselves flying, or we may be living in a different time period. But even those are derived from worldly experiences. One very important aspect of our dream movies, however, is one that you may find surprising, is that they do not replay real events that we remember. They are not a replay of actual experiences. They are founded on experiences, but they're not just a reproduction. And we will come back to this because it's an important point in the current scientific understanding of why we dream. So let's turn now to the other side and look at what is happening in the brain during these three major states, during waking, sleeping, and dreaming. And I will focus on brain waves. These are the easily recorded electrical manifestations of brain activity. And you can record brain waves and the electroencephalogram, or EEG, in a very simple way. You attach an array of electrodes, and they're the little discs that are much like the electrodes that are used if you go for an exam and they take your EKG. And you attach them to the surface of the scalp, and you don't even have to shave the hair off. Then you feed the electrical signals that the electrodes pick up into some sort of recording device, and nowadays also into a computer that analyzes their characteristics. It's such a simple procedure that when I was teaching neuroscience to undergraduates at the University of Washington 40, 50 years ago, I had them do it as a course lab. And from time to time, they would pick it up and do a project using that approach. When you look at the EEG, you quickly see that when your subject is awake and alert, their EEG is characterized by low voltage, relatively high frequency, and noisy looking electrical activity. Yeah, it's just irregular. It's called the beta rhythm. If they are awake but quiet, and especially if their eyes are closed, their EEG shows an additional component that is larger and more obviously sinusoidal. It's referred to as alpha waves. As they get drowsy and drift off into sleep, the low voltage, high frequency beta rhythm and the slower alpha waves are increasingly replaced by the even higher voltage and slower so-called theta rhythm. And finally, once they're really sound asleep, the EEG is dominated by large and beautifully rhythmic activity, so-called delta waves. I'll give you some numbers. The frequency of delta waves starts around 4 cycles per second. Yeah. It goes down to, it includes components that are as slow as 0.1 cycles per second, right? That means that one cycle of activity that is regularly produced by the brain lasts 10 seconds, and it's repeated over and over again. From time to time, in the middle of sleep that is dominated by these very slow delta waves, there is an abrupt switch, really abrupt, to an EEG that looks very much like it looks in the waking state. And this awake-like activity lasts for 10 minutes or longer, and then the delta rhythm comes back. If during such an episode you wake your subject up and ask what they were experiencing, most of the time they will tell you that they were dreaming. Dreams do occur at other times as well, but they occur with the highest frequency and regularity and are the most elaborate during episodes when the delta rhythm of deep sleep has suddenly been replaced by an EEG that looks like it does in the awake state. And there is another attribute of this dream-prone state whose EEG resembles that of the awake state. The eyes jump around as if they were tracking something moving in the visual world. These are called rapid eye movements. The eyes are closed, but they're still behaving this way. These are called rapid eye movements, and they give rise to the name that has been given to this type of sleep. It's referred to as rapid eye movement or REM sleep. So neuroscientists regularly refer to two physiologically defined categories of sleep: non-REM sleep, which includes two levels that are transitional from the awake state plus that third stage, deep sleep, and REM sleep that occurs during episodes during deep sleep. So EEG recordings show that there is a strikingly close correlation between what the brain is doing and the state that we find ourselves in. But we have to ask, does this correlation truly reflect causation? Does our brain really generate the states we experience and cause us, for example, to transition from wakefulness into sleep? Do we do that because of what the brain is doing? Well, the evidence for a causal role for the brain is very strong. And as has happened so many times, the first really concrete evidence came from clinical cases. Starting just before the time of the First World War and the flu epidemic of 1918, and continuing way into the 1920s, there was a second serious illness that swept Europe. It was referred to as encephalitis lethargica. Encephalitis referring to the brain, and lethargica to the primary symptom, at least at the beginning of each infection, and that was extreme lethargy, with patients sleeping for up to 20 hours a day, and in some cases, literally for weeks and months at a stretch, though it remained possible to wake them up deliberately. And through all this time, they had conspicuous eye movements, like during REM sleep. There were other patients, though not as many, who had exactly the opposite symptoms when they became infected. They had prolonged insomnia, no sleep, no rapid eye movements, but they did exhibit uncontrolled bodily movements, sometimes verging on the violent. A symptom called chorea which has the same linguistic root as the word choreography, right? Bodily movements, and the inability to fall asleep. These were extreme symptoms, and they affected lots of people. And they prompted a distinguished Viennese neurologist, the Baron Konstantin von Economo, to analyze the patients with really great care. After examining the brains of people who had died of the disease, and many did, he found a characteristic pattern of inflammation in what is called the brain stem, the central axis of the brain, sort of an extension of the spinal cord, out of which the two hemispheres emerge. The brainstem is usually regarded as the evolutionarily oldest part of the brain, and it contains a number of centers that regulate vital functions like breathing and heart rate and eye movements. And based on his observations, von Economo proposed that the brainstem has a pair of distinct centers relating to sleep, one of them promoting wakefulness and the other promoting sleep. And so there would be an association of function with specific location. Well, this work was in swing a century ago. It's a long time. And you can well imagine that the results have gotten much more complex over time, and they really have. But the basic idea that there are anatomically defined centers and circuits that promote wakefulness and others that promote sleep, that basically still prevails. And there are models about how they interact with each other and so forth. It also turned out that specific neurotransmitters are involved in the operation of specific ones of these centers and circuits. And in addition, chemicals are known that interfere with the operation of these transmitters. And this means that they affect the operation of the systems that promote wakefulness and sleep. Right? It's a chemical process. And you're very familiar with the effect of one of these interference chemicals. It's caffeine. Coffee and tea are the world's most widely used agents that affect our internal states. Now, I looked at a comprehensive review paper that provided a list of close to 20 ways in which caffeine affects the body. And here are 7 that take place in the brain. The rest take place in other parts of the body. Caffeine increases alertness. It enhances cognitive performance. It decreases mental fatigue. And these are all based on very sophisticated tests. It increases the ability to concentrate and focus attention. It enhances short-term memory. It increases the ability to solve problems that require reasoning. And it even increases the ability to make correct decisions. So it's an impressive list. There's a little contrary example that appeared very, very recently. There was a study that provided evidence that drinking too much coffee or tea substantially enhances impulsive shopping. And people who do this will spend up to 50% more money on stuff they don't really need than other people do, right? So you might say this is another kind of internal state. So the molecular mechanism of the action of caffeine has been thoroughly worked out. So it's not just something you drink in a cup. We know what the caffeine molecules actually do. In most cases, electrical signals are transmitted from one nerve cell to the multiple other cells that it connects with, not electrically, but by the release of a chemical called the transmitter. In order to generate the signal, to generate a signal in the next cell, that transmitter has to bind to receptor molecules on the receiving cell. And there's a release mechanism as a transmitter, there's a binding mechanism, and a response in the next cell. Caffeine molecules bind to the receptor molecules to which a specific transmitter, adenosine, would normally bind, and they don't let go. And this binding blocks the transmission of signals mediated by adenosine. It effectively silences the synapses in which adenosine is the transmitter. Right? So the consequence is a reduction in the effectiveness of the circuits that promote sleep, because some of them use adenosine, and this is what results in such effects as increased alertness, focus, cognitive performance, and the like. Right? It's the binding of a specific molecule to another specific molecule in specific regions of the brain that underlies that change. So the overall evidence for causality can be summarized in this simple way. Modifying the function of specific centers and circuits in the brain, primarily in the brainstem, and doesn't matter how you modify them, leads to specific effects on the waking state and the sleep state. What the effects are depends on which regions and circuits are affected by the experimental treatment, or by disease, or by an ingested material like coffee. Modification of brain function comes first, and changes in the internal state follow as a consequence. So now I want to return to the question of why we have these states in the first place. Yeah. Well, why do we have a sleep-wake cycle? The waking state is the state in which we live the lives that we're aware of. As I said in the beginning, from a biological perspective, it's during waking that we do all the things that enable us to live, to bear children, and to help those children reach their own reproductive stage. It's part of an ongoing process. Now, if you look a little further, you realize that we ourselves have been brought into physical existence through the action of the genes that we inherited from our parents. And each of us passes half of those genes to our own children. If we fail to reproduce successfully, our gene set will vanish. Right? So for this reason, biology says, evolution promotes the development of gene sets that maximize reproduction. And the implementation of this dominant aspect of life takes place during the waking state. So we need to be awake. This, of course, is a narrow perspective. It tells us nothing directly about why we are such curious creatures, why we become engaged in abstract ideas, but why spiritual practices are so nourishing, and so on. But it does offer a foundation for understanding why we have such powerful protective instincts, why we love our children, why family life is so important to us, why we want to live in societies. There are indeed many aspects of life that relate closely to the survival and reproduction that evolutionary thinking focuses on. The sleep state has been a much bigger puzzle, right? Because if you're asleep, you can't eat, and you're subject to predation and other events that put your life or the lives of your offspring in jeopardy. So why would our body, our brain, drive us into this state? Well, intriguing evidence is accumulating. For example, deep sleep is the time our immune system gears up, making us more resistant to infections. It's during sleep that the body does most of its rebuilding. You know that we repair and rebuild our bones throughout our lifetime so that their form is best adapted to our changing needs, happens primarily during sleep. When we use our muscles, especially if we're doing something demanding, we tend to damage our muscle fibers in the process. Like bone, our muscle tissue has a built-in system for making repairs, and it operates primarily during deep sleep. Let me tell you about a report I came across by chance just last evening as I was preparing for this morning. It's a study by a Japanese team on a tiny nematode worm called Caenorhabditis elegans. It's become a very, very sophisticated model organism for experimental studies. What the team found just last fall is that when mutations occur in 3 genes that are expressed not in the brain, but in peripheral tissues, the worms sleep significantly longer than usual. Well, it turns out that these genes are involved in tissue repair processes. And the results are being taken to support the view that at least some of the processes that take place in various regions of the body are communicated to the brain so that it can exercise its regulatory functions in ways that benefit the body the most, including the sleep-wake cycle. And, external signaling like this is not a surprise. After all, we sleep mainly during the night, right? Not during the day. And so our sleep-wake cycle is synchronized with the external environment. The brain runs the cycle. It needs to know about that environment in order to produce the synchrony. And remember what it feels like when you suddenly change time zones. Right? You have an internal clock that is out of sync with the environment, and it takes a while for that internal clock to become synchronized, and it affects the sleep-wake cycle through the brain. And still more happens during sleep. In the last 2 decades or so of really intensive research has been showing that sleep plays a huge role in the consolidation of memories. I want to read you the opening words of the abstract of a major review paper published in 2021, so it's pretty recent, in the Annual Review of Psychology. It was prepared by 3 investigators at Northwestern University. And even the title of the paper is telling. Memory and Sleep, How Sleep Cognition Can Change the Waking Mind for the Better. And so what they say. The memories that we retain can serve many functions. They guide our future actions, form a scaffold for constructing the self, our self-image, continue to shape both the self and the way we perceive the world. Although most memories we acquire each day are forgotten, and there's a lot of evidence for that, those integrated within the structure of multiple prior memories tend to endure. A rapidly growing body of research is steadily elucidating how the consolidation of memories depends on their reactivation during sleep. Processing memories during sleep not only helps counteract their weakening, so we remember them better, but also supports problem solving, creativity, and emotional regulation. So the memories that get consolidated, they're not casual. They're not just odd things. They contribute to our ability to cope with whatever faces us. And to quote again from that big review article, the human brain controls a remarkable capacity to adaptively learn from our experiences, thereby improving the way we cope with life's challenges. So this is another process that occurs during sleep, but supports our waking lives. Now, these comments apply to the sleep state in general, but what about the episodes of dreaming that occur within sleep? we're aware of them, but we forget most, remember some, we're aware of them when they're happening, and they are often very vivid. So what's special about the dream state? What role does it play in our lives? It has lately been argued that the fact that dreams include elements that we are well familiar with does not mean that they are reliving or reanalyzing specific experiences. I mentioned that at the beginning. They are not pictures of our memories. In a recent book entitled What Brains Dream, the authors, and one of them is director of the Center for Sleep and Cognition at Harvard Medical School. The other one is a professor at the Center for Advanced Research in Sleep Medicine at the University of Montreal. They offer this view. Specifically, we argue that dreaming allows the sleeping brain to enter an altered state of consciousness in which it can construct imagined narratives and respond emotionally to them. Unlike problem solving during wakefulness that relies on imagining and planning, dreaming stops short of offering definitive solutions to our concerns. Instead, our dreams serve to explore the solution space, helping us discover new possibilities. It is up to other processes, both in wakefulness and in sleep, to draw conclusions and delineate our plans. Dreaming takes what has been and shows us what might be. So, on this view, dreaming greatly expands our awareness of possibilities precisely because it is not bound to the reality that we have already experienced. So let me close with this following thought about what we've learned. We live the lives that we are aware of during the waking state. However, processes go on during the sleep and dream state that support those lives. We may not be consciously aware of them, but they are very important. They include such matters as immune protection, bodily repair, consolidation of memories, and the opportunity for the mind to wander in a way that is prompted by, but not constrained by, past experiences. While we are asleep, we do withdraw from the world around us in significant ways, and this can put us in danger. However, we also benefit in significant ways. And we can suppose that this is why sleep is virtually universal among the world's animals. All three states that the brain puts us in, the waking state, the sleep state, and the dream state, all three play important roles in the lives that we live and cherish. This is my message for today, and I hope we can have a conversation. Thank you.
We should recommend all the shopping complexes to have free coffee at the entrance. Right. based on one of the studies that you cited, right? Now, and some do, very few though. Now, the question I have, I happen to have read a book, and the book was entitled Sleep a few years ago, many years ago, actually. And you probably know about that book, but I don't remember much of it. I read only a few chapters. And one of the things that I do remember is, as you pointed out, the importance of sleep because they rebuild our body and cells and whatnot, and immune system as well, as you said. Uh, if for, like if we do not compensate for the lack of sleep within 2 week period, then the loss is forever. That's what I remember reading actually. So meaning, let's say I slept only 4 hours last night. And the typically, let's say for my body and for my health at this stage, maybe 6.5 hours. So that 2.5 hours of lack of sleep, I must compensate within 2 weeks period or less in order to not have a permanent loss, in terms of cell rebuilding or memory loss and whatnot. Any any thoughts on that? Any studies on that?
Well, I'm not aware of any studies. This is rather beyond my usual scope of reading, but fascinating. But what I have recognized in the works that I have read is that this field has been changing very rapidly. And reviews that you I have a textbook, for example, that was published in 2020, in 2000, and it is a standard textbook on neurobiology for medical students, and it's thick like this, got 1,500 or 1,800 pages or something, and the lead author is a Nobel Prize winner, whom I happen to know to a minor extent. So it's a standard work. There's a lot in the chapters on sleeping and dreaming that is rather different from what you read in recent reviews. So it's such a complex system, and so many new methods have come into use that I would not feel bound by data from that long ago. If it felt important, I would try to check it in more recent studies and see whether there is agreement or disagreement.
Right.
It's hard to know.
Right. Let me ask a very quick again, second question. Not a question, but it's really out of world idea, which I've had for a few years now, working in the area of productivity enhancement and efficiency improvements, in our corporate world. Uh, we do lose about 1/3 of our life, sleeping, resting, and whatnot. Uh, w- what if we can come up with, and it's a crazy idea, with a pill that will be a substitute for sleep, meaning all those advantages that we do get during sleep. If we can just, get that, with, gulping a pill, then productivity will be really enhanced, right? It's a crazy idea. I don't really, advocate for that, but is that a possibility, because we always in the world of science.
I agree with your evaluation. It's a crazy idea. Uh, and for a reason, it's that so many different things happen during the sleep-wake dream cycle that the likelihood of finding a substitute, it seems to me to be extremely low. I can see that specific functions might be um, supplemented, for example, by so if we have repair functions that are that need to be carried out, and they are carried out for some reason which the papers don't tell us. They only tell us that they take place primarily during sleep. They don't say why that is. But suppose we find out why, and we can then extend that tissue repair process into the waking state, not have it be limited to the sleeping state. That I can see. That's relatively specific. But if you take the full range, including unrestrained imagination, that seems unlikely to me.
Thank you, John.
Uh, I have a question,
Yes,
Tony.
please.
A question is, how do you compare these states with what happens in the brain or whatever during meditation? Let's
That
forget
will be
about
the
the
subject
delirium.
of.
Let's forget about the delirium state, which not everybody gets to, but
Yeah.
the normal ones that you and I can probably do for 15-20 minutes, either guided or non-guided.
There's been a large amount of study on that, and I have actually been thinking of that as the theme for the next time I make a presentation.
Okay, you can answer
The
that.
brain and meditation.
Maybe you can answer that at that time, because that itself is probably.
I will learn a lot more between now and then.
I have a question. This is Meenal. I'm Madhavi's younger sister. So can you comment about yoga nidra? Like when you do the psychic sleep, as they call it, for 30 minutes, does that have the reparative potential that you get during sleep?
I have no idea. I have no idea. My first thought was that that might not be long enough. But then, when you think back to those birds that only sleep for 4 seconds at a time, then you can see that that time is not continuous time is not necessarily a constraint. I I have no idea. I think one would actually have to have a study to look at that. And there may very well be such studies. I remember years ago, would have been in the 80s, probably, perhaps 90s, but probably in the 80s. I was traveling, I was on a kind of a scientific visit to India, and I stopped in a lab in Bangalore, whose chief investigator was studying brainwaves and meditation. That was his focus. And that means that he was working with people who were in these sort of focused states. And it would not surprise me at all if there were data. It's just that I don't know it.
Okay,
When
because
I,
because on personal experience, I have when I have a very long day, and then I break for 30 minutes and do it, and I find it gives me tremendous energy to function to the
oh,
rest of my day. But then I didn't know if there was any data, if it did the same muscular repairs and all of that, would it initiate those same processes?
well, exactly. I can see, and in fact, I've had the same experience. And I'm sure we probably all have, that meditation will, in a sense, restore us to our optimal state of awareness. But the repair process, that feels to me like it's in a different category, and you would need to have data. And if I find some, I will bring it next time, but I don't have data at the moment.
Okay, thank you. But I enjoyed your talk. It was very informative. Thank you.
I
Thank
have
you.
a follow-up question. The restorative effect of what they call power nap.
Mhm.
How- uh, I'm not sure whether that's the same as what what was discussed last time, but power nap as opposed to a short meditation after a strenuous one.
There are lots of questions, aren't there? And y- you know, without having any data, I would imagine that there are similarities, um, but I would be surprised if there were not also differences. And you'd have to look carefully and make a comparison. And that's one way in which the field has been changing, is that we are able to make a greater variety of measures of what is actually happening. So we learn more, we get deeper insight into kind of the actual nature of these different states that we enter.
Johnny, this is Jan.
Yes.
I have been wearing one of these Aura rings for the last 2 or 3 months, which is specifically for, I guess I could show it. So here is my finger.
Oh, yeah.
It has this big silver ring on it.
Mhm.
And inside it are all these sensors. And so my understanding from their literature is that it's 76% the same info as what you get from the brain waves, but it measures what I do all night. So it tells me how much deep sleep, how much REM sleep, how much light sleep when I've been up and when I've been down. And it's been, so this has been a really interesting talk for me, because it relates to this thing that I've been experimenting with for myself.
Mhm.
And it tells me essentially that although I snore a lot, I'm sleeping really well.
Yeah, that's one of the beneficial consequences of simultaneously improving technology and the clarity of what particular signals tell us about what is actually happening. Yeah, not every signal is trustworthy. And the EEG has been studied so much that it can be the foundation for making comparisons of the reliability of other forms of measurement.
Mhm.
This
Okay.
ring is something I've not heard of before, but I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, I sort of became aware that my cell phone will count my steps. So I don't pay any attention to that, but I check on the count and I find that, oh, this is really helpful because it's sort of an external motivation to do more. I'm at let's say uh, 6,700 steps. Well, let's walk a little more. Let's get up to 7,000. That I might not bother doing otherwise. And it works because the technology is not perfect, but it's sufficiently reliable to actually give a meaningful count. And so I'm guessing that whatever the technology is, um, it it can play that kind of role. It can tell you what's happening. Either you're satisfied or you'll make an adjustment.
Mhm.
Johnny,
Yes, please.
this is Shashi. Well, very fascinating talk, but I like to go back to the basic roots, the reason why these Sunday sessions have started in 79. It's important to go back into old scriptures, which have basically been written by the subsequent disciples through the teachings of their teachers, which received that wisdom through the deep meditative state. And that's what the Upanishads are, we've been discussing for so many years. So if you look at that particular aspect of those teachings, we talked about 3 different phases of existence for 24 hours for human beings. One is the state when we are awake and we're dealing with the creation that we have around called Vishwa state. The second state is when we are in dream state called Tejas state. It's a world of thoughts, so we call subconscious mind, which interacts, and the various parameters that you touched alluded to, whether they go this or that, whatever it is, whether there's a real subconscious mind or something else possibilities that mind is considering. And the final and the most important stage of sleep is the sushupti, the deep sleep state. I think we have been discussing over so many previous sessions that it's kind of difficult for people who are interested more in productivity and taking a pill to forget about the need of sleep. That's a different aspect. But really speaking, the real purpose I see is in the human life is to understand who really we are and connect to the original to complete the circle and get the ultimate benefit of this human existence, wherein we have a chance to reflect, go deep inside through meditations and reconnect with our own source, which is the divinity itself. So coming back to the deep sleep, at that particular time, we are no longer dealing with the world which is awake, the universe. We are no longer in active communication with the subconscious world, but we are in communication with or without knowledge as to our true nature. Because most of us are not fully evolved individuals, we recognize, we connect with that true nature of ours through a covering of ignorance. We are ignorant about our true nature. And despite that ignorance, being in contact with true nature of ours, Johnny, you get refreshed, recharged, rejuvenated to continue for the next day's work with full force with a big cup of coffee in your hand. That's true. But nonetheless, when you have an understanding as to who you are, your understanding and connection with your true nature is infinitely stronger. There was a young question asked by Meenal in between. I don't know if she's on the line or not. She's my cousin. And she was talking about Nidra Mudra, where during the active hard work, you're so exhausted. When you go into a short stage of meditation, wherein you forget about the external world, the dream world does not come in the way. You're connecting within yourself, and that is the connection where, with or without knowledge, mostly without knowledge, you go deep inside in that meditative state, you connect with your true nature. And that's where she was able to draw the strength of her true nature, which is divine. So what I'm trying to say is that these are very fascinating numbers that you talked about, the alpha, beta, delta. These are as being a radiologist, we deal with EEG as well as the MRI changes, where we see those changes. And various studies from Stanford and Harvard have talked about the various changes that take place in the brain substances and the brain waves of the Buddhist monks that they studied and the volunteers they studied in Harvard. So those changes are well recognized. But I think what we need to really reflect upon is the value of connecting to our true nature. So very fascinating talk we have. But I was just trying to answer a question that was asked: what happens? Why we feel recharged, refreshed when you have periodic deep meditative state during the day? So thank you again. Appreciate it. And I look forward to your second session coming up in 2 more weeks, Johnny. You should be know
Wait a
that.
minute, wait a minute.
Your mission, should you decide to accept it and you don't have any choice, in 2 weeks' time you're on. So you have only 2 weeks to prepare. Thank you, John.
Thank you
Oh
for that.
my.
Yeah. Thank you for that explanation.
Very fascinating talk. But I think we really have to really go deep down as to who we really are and connect to itself. I think these are interesting measurements. But what is important is what is the basic substance that is giving you that strength. Thanks again. Really enjoyed it. Any more questions or comments, guys? That's the time to get inside his brains.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
One is he talked about repair which happens during the sleep.
Uh-huh.
Is it just the defragmentation of the memory? It's like computer, you have to defragment your computer, right?
Uh-huh.
Or is it the physical tissue repair?
Physical tissue repair.
So-
they're not mutually exclusive by any means, but there is tissue repair included.
Okay.
So one much studied example is muscle tissue. When you exercise or you do hard work, then one of the consequences is that many of your muscle fibers get damaged. And if they never got repaired, you would have a progressive decline in your strength. Well, but you don't, right? If anything, you have an increase in your strength. And that's because the repair processes are physically effective. And one of they do repair in the sense of mending tears and things like that, but they also add to the capability of your muscle cells, and muscle cells operate through so-called filaments that are made of two different proteins that are arranged so in an interleaved parallel way, and one of them pulls on the other one, and that's what makes the muscle cell shorten. Well, one of the things that happens is that as you work your muscles, you build more of these protein filaments within the muscle cells so that they can exert greater force, and the filaments occupy space, so your muscles get bigger, right? And that it's not exclusively done during deep sleep, but it's done predominantly during deep sleep. So it's a biosynthetic kind of response.
So how does the birds who sleep half a second, they repair
Whole
the,
second.
it's the albatross who doesn't sleep, who sleeps half the mind. and he's always flying. For 5 years, he's flying continuously. Okay, and also the mammals who swim,
Yeah,
they don't sleep continuously because they have to breathe outside, right?
that's right.
So how do they repair the tissue? Because you can't repair the tissue in half a second. So I think it's about how only the brain is related to sleep and not the tissue. Can't you repair your tissue when you're awake?
Well, yes, you can. And I'm sure that there are measurements that are relevant to that question. It came up for me as well when I started reading about these different sleep cycles. That was the first question that came to me. And I don't know the answer, but I am betting that there is some data out there that is relevant to the question. But I
Yeah.
totally agree with you that it's not obvious how that would happen.
I can comment on that if you like.
Yes.
So tissue repair can happen all the time. It's just that it is enhanced during sleep. So for humans, it is enhanced during sleep time. Now, for animals and mammals who have, different physiology, I'm sure their repair mechanisms are different than ours. So therefore, you can't quite equate it. But my understanding is that for humans, I mean, it's not that if you don't sleep, you will not repair. I mean, wound healing continues throughout the day, but it's just maximal will be during the night. So that would be kind of my explanation.
Yeah. And likewise with the immune system. I mean, it's not that your immune system somehow doesn't do anything when you're wide awake. Of course it does. It's just that the processes that sort of activate it operate more strongly during sleep than they do during the day and during the waking state. And exactly why that is are there certain steps that are sort of mutually exclusive? If you are, I don't know, if you're running, is it for some reason more difficult? Well, you can see that if you were running, it would be more difficult to repair a muscle cell because you're using the muscle cell, right? So there are specifics that enter into the picture, and you have to look at the specifics to get really good answers.
In our Ramayana, there are two instances of sleeping. One is we hear that for Lakshman, he didn't sleep for 14 years and his wife slept for him.
Oh, wow.
And second is the Kumbhkarna, who sleeps for 6 months and wakes up for 6 months. Yeah, imagination at least, it is there. I don't know, I don't have any data about it, but yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was not aware of those stories. Yeah.
John, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Colleen. Thank you for this was very interesting. I have a question. I think that it would be a mix of your knowledge and Dr. Sani's knowledge. It was an experience I had, and Jan's pictures on her back wall of the rock formations, assuming it's like Southwest. I was driving through the Southwest a year or two ago. And these were 8, 9, 10-hour days of driving from St. Paul. I made a stop in Grand Junction to sleep. And I went into a deep sleep immediately and I've had these before where it's a full body feeling, it's lucid. So this particular, I was moving as if I were a bird or a flying craft low over the rock formations and land covers of flowers and fences and just moving along. And then I woke up. And then when I'd shut my eyes again, I mean, I didn't have to go back to sleep. The video, it was like a video playing, and it would continue. And then eventually I must have fallen back asleep. but it was just a very notable experience. And I had, so that was driving down to Arizona. I had another experience when I was driving down there, and this was more above trees and mountains, but close, vivid, lucid, floating, you know, bodily feelings. And so I'm wondering, so I feel as though it's a mix of what we know, what you guys know, and I'm learning about Upanishads, Gita, connection with self, and how the brain interacts. And so I'm wondering if you have insight as to what I might have been experiencing. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, there is a phenomenon that's called lucid dreaming. And from the little tiny bit that I understand, lucid dreaming is a capability that you can actually be trained to uh, have or to have more strongly. You probably have to have some background that makes you open to it, but it's a state that reflects the way you live your life, is my understanding. And there might be something in the description and the study of lucid dreaming that would be relevant. And I can certainly have a peek at that and see what I find. It is still dreaming. You know, it's just because you were not aware of a gradual falling asleep doesn't mean that this was not a physiologically defined dream like any other dream. That is to say, it had this characteristic low voltage, high frequency activity that normally would be distinctive because it comes in the middle of a deep sleep, but you just jumped into it. That would be kind of my first guess that was the state that you were in. Um, but as I say, there is this whole phenomenon of lucid dreaming, and I will have a look at that and see what that way of approaching the question might contribute.
Okay, just to let you know, I do not do drugs. I do not drink alcohol. So, however, I don't have a good diet. I mean, I eat all kinds of junk, but that would be the only thing that might
Well, no, but
cause.
you do practices, right?
Oh, meditation and exercise.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
See, so I think those would be the relevant ones. I don't
I
think that,
see.
yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I do want to also add to that, very close to where I was located, um, the next day, there was a helicopter crash in Southern California, very close. It was in the Mojave Desert, I believe. So it was very close to where I was, you know, and and this is me not knowing a lot about this, but I felt that they were related somehow. Just the way, you know, I was going so quickly over the surface of the earth.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I wanna, you know, I wanna say that the rock formations, you know, the energies from rock formations, you know, in Colorado and Utah had a lot to do with that.
Oh, they're very
Just
potent. Yeah,
intuitively, I'm saying that. Yeah.
yeah. And they're very impactful on some people, to people who are open to that kind of impact.
Okay.
Not everybody is. Uh, so you enter these states of through a prevailing internal state that is very personal, and what you experience and what you're open to experiencing may be very different from what a person who grew up differently or sort of has a different internal state and set of learnings and so on would experience under the same circumstances.
Okay, well, thank you.